I've been using the nearly maxed out M1 Max 16-inch MacBook Pro for nearly a month now. It cost a small fortune, it's massive, but was it worth buying? Hello and welcome back to Mark Ellis Reviews, and thank you for subscribing if you have, and if you haven't subscribed, the button is, you know where that button is. This is the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and after what was a really frustrating wait for mine to be delivered, which involved UPS and a set of window blinds, no, really. It has been in my possession now for a month. More importantly, it's replaced my beloved 16GB M1 Mac Mini, which is sat over there, as my main video editing machine for this channel. Today, I'm going to tell you what I think about it, having used it solidly for 1 month. But firstly, just a quick thank you to this video's sponsor, which is 1Password. 1Password are a fantastic supporter of this channel, and I love their software. And it's not just a password manager either. Although it's fantastic at storing your passwords and your usernames for pretty much anything, it can also hold notes, credit card details, passport details, basically anything you want to keep safe, you put it in 1Password. Now, I transitioned to lots of new Macs, as you would guess, for this channel, and it's made the process super simple. And because I occasionally go cross-platform and use things like Windows, it's made that really easy as well. And more importantly, they are just a fantastic bunch of people, and I think that shines through in their software, but also the support they offer and the way they go about running their business. Now, if you want to see what 1Password can do for you, check out the link in my description. Right, let's get into my 16-inch MacBook Pro review. I love this new MacBook design. I think it's a beautiful hark back to the PowerBook days. And what's strange is that it's not technically that much thicker or heavier than the outgoing version. But because it's got this very squared off, thick design, it just looks and feels a lot heavier than the previous one. I do think the 14-inch version feels a bit better to carry around under your arm, but both the 14-inch and the 16-inch really look like they mean business. And then there's some design touches that I really like, such as the black keyboard bed and the etched MacBook Pro that you get on the base of the machine. The 16-inch version, though, is massive. It's a lot bigger than the 14-inch version, as you would expect, but I think for some people it's going to be too much. If you're after a super powerful MacBook Pro that you can take to meetings regularly, take with you on the train, take to coffee shops, the 14-inch version is the one to go for. And I can say that confidently because you can get the exact same spec for the 14-inch as you can the 16-inch. So going for the 14-inch doesn't mean you have to kind of miss out on certain things. For me though, I quite like the size of it. And the reason it works for me is because it only really makes one journey, which is from my house to this studio. And it only really serves two purposes for me, which is to do audio and video editing on it. So whether or not I'm just getting old or I don't know what it is, this one just feels too big to lug around everywhere. So my advice with this is if you haven't gone to try one out in a shop or you haven't gone and looked at one in person, go and check one of these 16-inch MacBook Pros out in an Apple store or in another retailer, or if your friend's got one, go and have a look at theirs, pick it up, get used to the size of it before you spend your money. Right, onto performance. So the version of the 16-inch MacBook Pro that I went for was the 32-core GPU version. I got 32 gig of unified memory, and I took the storage up to 2 terabytes. Now I think that decision between the M1 Pro and the M1 Max isn't particularly straightforward, but I have made a video about that, which I'll link to above. And I also didn't see the point in going for 64 gig. I've talked a lot about the unified memory choices for the new MacBook Pro. Again, there's another video for that, which I'll link to above. But the performance of the spec that I chose is ridiculous. However, you're only ever going to experience that performance if you put the machine to use in very specific circumstances. For me, that's video. And yes, this is only one thing that you can do with this MacBook. I often get told by people that I should explore other areas, but I'm not a computer programmer, I'm not a data scientist. I can't talk about things basically that I don't do. So video editing is just one example of how you can put these machines to use. I did do some tests actually, very unlike me, but I did do a little benchmark test. It won't set the world alight, but it's interesting I think nonetheless. What I did, I took a 20-minute piece of 4K footage filmed on this camera, which is the Sony FX3. And what I did, I took that footage, put it into Final Cut, and I first of all did a color grade on the footage just to get some rendering going. And I then exported that footage to an MP4 file. Now on my old, bless it, M1 16 gig Mac Mini, the render took 6 minutes and 37 seconds. On the MacBook Pro 14-inch base spec, the cheapest one you can get, it took 3 minutes 14 seconds. And on the MacBook Pro M1 Max 16 gigabyte 32 core crazy version, it did it in 3 minutes and 9 seconds. So not a massive step up from the M1 Pro in the 14-inch MacBook Pro, but 6 minutes 37 seconds on my M1 Mac Mini versus 3 minutes and 9 seconds for a render. That's quite a gain. However, things got more impressive with the export. So the export on the M1 Mac Mini took 12 minutes and 53 seconds. On the base spec 14-inch MacBook Pro, it took 9 minutes 54 seconds. And on my 16-inch MacBook Pro, it took 5 minutes 36 seconds. So that nearly 13-minute wait that I would have on the M1 Mac Mini has been reduced to 5 minutes 36 seconds. What's interesting though is that I've taken that old way of thinking about video editing from the Mac Mini to the 16-inch MacBook Pro. So previously, I would color grade my A-roll to camera footage, and then I'd go make a coffee just to let it render. I still do that, even though I'm using the 16-inch MacBook Pro, but before I've even swiveled my chair, it's pretty much done the job. Now, if you used to have, or you do currently have, a 16-inch MacBook Pro, the Intel version, you'll know that that machine gets very hot and very noisy with its fans. I'm happy to report that the new 16-inch MacBook Pro isn't like that at all. It's not silent though, at all, and it does get warm. This is just a quiet hum that spins up depending on what you're doing. So for instance, for me, it's when I'm rendering stuff or if I'm exporting quite a large video file. And it does get warm. If you put your finger on the metal just above the keyboard, it gets quite warm. It's not a big deal, but it does reveal that even these new M1 machines aren't completely infallible. But I should emphasize that the base spec 14-inch MacBook Pro and this spec'd up 16-inch MacBook Pro feel identical during normal everyday computing tasks. So if that's the sort of stuff you do and you just want a MacBook Pro, I would really think carefully about upping the specs. That base spec version is just a brilliant computer, and you're only ever going to experience the real capabilities of these chips if you dig into some very specific workflows. So choose carefully. Regular viewers will know that I don't do battery benchmark tests. That's for two reasons. One of them is I don't really have the time to do it, and the other one, the more important one, is I just can't be bothered. I'm far more interested to see how batteries perform on a normal everyday workload. I've talked a lot about the battery performance in the M1 MacBook Air, and it's absolutely stunning, mainly because of the standby time. Now the 16-inch MacBook Pro is no different. The standby time is just ridiculous. You can close that lid with, let's say, 30% remaining, go to bed, wake up the next day, and it will still have 30% remaining. But this one goes a step further, and it's the in-use time on this MacBook Pro that is just mind-boggling. Case in point, I came to the studio a couple of days ago and I just charged up the MacBook that morning, so it had 100% battery, got here at about, I don't know, 8:30 in the morning. And during that day, I did a couple of video edits, I did loads of team calls, did a bit of work in Logic Pro, did some uploading to YouTube, did some work in Lightroom, did a little bit of work in Photoshop, I used Discord, did some spreadsheet work in Excel, and I left most of those apps open all the time. By 5 o'clock, I think it had about 20% battery left. Basically, I didn't get that warning that pops up saying, you better stop doing what you're doing now and plug me in because I'm gonna lose all your work. And what's more impressive is that I've just stopped thinking about the battery on that MacBook Pro. So during that day's work, I didn't even glance at the battery indicator. Thinking back to the Apple Unleashed event, they talked an awful lot about the battery performance of these new chips and the new MacBooks, and I found it a bit boring. I almost switched off at that point and thought, well, most people are going to leave them plugged in. You actually don't need to at all, and it's not a good idea to keep your laptop plugged in constantly anyway, but we finally have a laptop where you don't have to do that. And as a creator, again, as a video editor, it's absolutely transformative. It's just complete freedom. I can now take this laptop wherever I need to and sit there without it being plugged in and get down to some really serious work. And I think it's probably the best part of this new 16-inch MacBook Pro. Onto the screen, and it is fantastic. It's beautiful. But Mac screens always are. They're not perfect. There are some screen uniformity issues here and there. There's a bit of ghosting taking place, all the normal stuff that you get from LED panels. But you have to go looking for it, and it doesn't really detract from what is just, on this particular laptop, a huge expanse of lovely retina density screen. I cannot fault it. I love video editing on it. I love editing photos on it. The color accuracy, the fact that it has the Pro XDR display stuff built into it as well. It's the best monitor I've ever used for editing anything on, basically. It has ProMotion, which is Apple's variable refresh, if you can say that, variable refresh rate screen technology. And I can't notice it half the time. I think it's there when you minimize and maximize windows and things, and if you scroll a few things around the screen. And in certain apps, you can, I think, see it, like in Logic Pro, for instance. But I think there's a compatibility thing going on. I don't think everything is compatible with ProMotion on the Mac. Basically, it's nowhere near as transformative as it is on the iPad Pro or the new iPhones. So don't get too excited about ProMotion, but do get excited about this panel, because it's just fantastic. And if you really want to see it sing, find some HDR content on Apple TV, which isn't hard to find, whack up the brightness and just sit back and watch. I've never seen anything look that good, ever. So I think beyond the battery performance on this laptop, the screen is definitely the next big highlight. The notch, it doesn't matter. I love the fact Apple has brought back the SD card slot and MagSafe. And again, during day-to-day use, they are both incredibly useful for someone like me. So all of the stuff that I record, whether it be video or audio, takes place on SD cards. Just popping those SD cards straight into the MacBook, transferring over, it's pretty quick, it's nice and fast. It's just so easy. Again, like the battery life, it just makes this such an easy laptop to use. And I was surprised about MagSafe. I wasn't that bothered about it coming back, really. I didn't really mind the fact that we were charging via USB-C, which you can still do if you want to. Actually, it's a really satisfying thing to have. And it does mean that you never take up a USB-C port when you're charging. The magnet's nice and strong, and again, a bit like going back to the looks of the PowerBook days. It's just a nice hark back to the MacBooks we used to love. Now, over the last couple of weeks, I've been asking you guys to send me questions on the new 16-inch MacBook Pro. I've got them here. I've not read them yet, so this is going to be a live Q&A session on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. So let's get straight into it. Jose M says, we have maybe 3 million videos about the new MacBooks. I think we have seen it all. That's a fair point, Jose. I've probably made about 2 million of those 3 million videos. I just think we're living in a very exciting time when it comes to Macs, and these new MacBook Pros are just such a way to cap off the year as far as Apple is concerned. They're like apologies. It's like them saying, look, we did screw up for many, many years. Here is what you wanted. I'm sorry about all these videos. I'll try not to, no, I'm gonna keep making them. Sorry. How future-proof is the mid-level MacBook Pro? That's from Brendan Turner. Mid-level, there's lots of mid-levels, I think, really, Brendan, but I think all of these Macs are pretty future-proof, really. And it depends what you mean by future-proof. If you're thinking about performance, then I would try and spec up things like the unified memory if you can, but even the 16 gig versions, even that base spec version of the 14-inch MacBook Pro, I think will last people many, many years. John Hillman says, I'd be interested in the form factor in relation to day-to-day portability and use, especially compared to the 14-inch or the Air. Does it fit in a reasonably sized bag, and is it suitable for a gym membership? I talked about this at the start of the video, obviously, John, and it's just very big. It's a very big laptop. For me, these days, it's too big to carry around everywhere. So again, I would just go somewhere that is selling these devices and somewhere where you can actually pick them up and just get a feel for the size of that laptop. The 14-inch, I think, is a far better choice for most people. WeScamp wants to know about difference in screen legibility from the 14-inch MacBook Pro and how well it performs with external displays at different resolutions. I haven't used the 16-inch MacBook Pro with an external display, so I can't answer that question. And difference in screen legibility from the 14-inch, it depends what you're doing on it. For me, video editing on the 14-inch is just too small, so the 16-inch is better for that, 100%. For everything else though, because these screens are so sharp and bright, you haven't got a problem on either size device, really. Jimmy Coley, hope I've got that right, he says, is 16 gigabytes of RAM, or unified memory, Jimmy, enough for video editing work? Put it this way, I used that 16 gigabyte M1 Mac Mini for 80 videos on this channel, and it was absolutely fine. The only thing I was pushing towards the end, since I upgraded my camera, really was those graphics cores. So if you're editing videos, I'd put your money towards graphics cores, personally. Stephen Carr says, how future-proof is it? It's a heavy investment, so before flexing the card, an important question, I think. It's a very important question, Stephen, and again, I just think these are very future-proof machines. My advice with this is always to spend as much as you can without breaking the bank, and that will get you a device that, one, you don't have any buyer's remorse over, two, that will offer decent resale value further down the line, and crucially work very hard for you for as long as you need it. Sunset Nova, awesome name, says, battery life on average daily use, will it last a typical 9 to 5 working day on battery? 100% yes. BSD Junkie says, does it get warm to the touch when you're doing things such as processing video? Do you notice any warmth through the body of the MacBook? If you're using the MacBook in the living room on your lap as opposed to desk, does it get warm? Yes, it does. As I mentioned earlier, I think it does depend on what you're doing, and to be honest, mine only gets warm if I'm rendering video or exporting stuff. So if I'm just sat there editing stuff and, you know, kind of getting on with daily tasks, it doesn't get warm at all. But if you push it, it does get warm, and the fans will occasionally kick in at quite a low volume. Christopher Tilley asks, is the MacBook Pro worth the money for you and for non-video creators? Yeah, it really is. It's a lot of money, and I would still consider the MacBook Air. If you don't need all that power, then I'd just get the MacBook Air, because that is such a good machine. Get the 16 gig version, that gives you plenty of headroom, plenty of longevity. Or if you want a desktop machine, get the Mac Mini or get the 24-inch iMac. But if you want as much power as you can afford, then these MacBook Pros are 100% worth the money. So in conclusion, the 16-inch MacBook Pro is a fabulous laptop. However, it's very big, so if you're worried about the size of it, go and check one out. Also, in daily use, normal type computery stuff, it doesn't feel any different in terms of speed and snappiness compared to that base spec 14-inch version. So if that's all you're doing and you just want a big MacBook Pro, I'd advise against spending too much on the higher spec options. But please do go and try one before you buy, because these are big, heavy, expensive laptops, and I don't want you to make a poor buying decision. Thanks for watching this, guys. Sorry it was a bit of a long video. There's quite a lot to cover with this particular review. But if you still got some time and you want to find out the differences between the M1 Pro and the M1 Max and how to decide which one to buy, keep watching for a link to that video. Until next time, thank you as always for watching, and I'll catch you next time.